to Watchmen on the Pod. All right, we're going to continue in our book reading. We are in book 2 of Augustine, The City of God Against the Pagans. This was edited by R.W. Dyson. And let's not forget this was written in the 300s, I believe the mid 300s. And here we go, book 2, chapter 1. Of the limit which must be set to necessary refutation. With the weakness of understanding common to all mankind, men everywhere presume to resist the clear evidence of truth. If they were to submit that weakness to wholesome doctrine as to a medicine, it would, with divine aid, be healed by the intercession of faith and godliness. Then men of right understanding would have no need to confute each and every error of vain opinion by engaging in lengthy discussion. They would need merely to express their understanding in words of sufficient clarity. As it is, however, the souls of the foolish suffer ever more severely and ever more abominably from this malady. Thus, even after the debt of truth has been paid as fully as one man can to another, they still defend their own unreasonable beliefs as though they were the very stuff of truth. They do this either because they are too blind to discern what is plain, or because they are entirely obstinate in their resolve not to accept even what they do discern. Often, therefore, there arises a need to speak at great lengths even of matters which are already clear. It is as though we were presenting them not for the inspection of men who will look at them, but as it were for an examination by touch by men whose eyes are closed. To what conclusion, though, shall we bring our discourse? And what will the limits of our discussion be, if we judge that we must always answer those who answer us? For those who cannot understand what is said to them, or those whose minds are so hardened to contradiction that they will not concur even when they do understand, these answer us, and, as is written, speak hard things and are tirelessly vain. If we resolve to refute their contrary arguments as often as they resolve obstinately to contradict our reasoning in whatever way they can, without considering the truth of what they say, you see what an infinite and toilsome and fruitless task we should have. And so, my son, Marcinellus, I should not like you or any of the others for whose benefit this labor of ours has been freely undertaken in the love of Christ, to judge my writings in such a way as to always require an answer to everything you hear that contradicts what you read in them. Do not become like those foolish women of those the apostle speaks, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Chapter 2. Of those things already set forth in Book 1. In the preceding book, then, since I had resolved to speak of the city of God, and with his help, taken in hand this whole work, it seemed to me that I should first resist those who attribute the wars by which this world is consumed, and especially the recent sack of Rome by the barbarians, to the Christian religion, by which they are forbidden to offer abominable sacrifices to demons. What they ought rather to attribute to Christ is the fact that, for his name's sake and against the laws and customs of war, the barbarians provided the largest churches as places of freedom in which men might take refuge, and in many cases showed such honor not only to the servants of Christ, but even to those who pretended to be such out of fear, that they pronounced unlawful for themselves things that would otherwise have been permitted, which otherwise have permitted them under the rules of war. There then arose the question of why these divine blessings came even to the ungodly and ungrateful, and by the same token, why the hardships brought about by warfare afflicted the godly equally with the ungodly. This question has many aspects, for in all our doing, all our daily doing, both the munificence of God and the calamities of men often come indiscriminately and without distinction to those who live well and those who live ill. This puzzle often disquiets many, and since the work which I had undertaken required me to solve it, I dwelt on it at some length, especially to bring consolation to those holy women of godly chastity, against whom a deed was perpetuated by the enemy, which, even though it did not take away their unshaken chastity, nevertheless brought grief to their modesty. I did this lest they should be ashamed of life, even though they have no guilt of which to be ashamed. Next, I spoke briefly against those who, with most impudent boldness, taunt us with the Christians who suffer misfortune, and especially with the violation of bodily purity suffered by the women, even though they remain chaste and holy in mind. These most unworthy and heedless persons have declined far from those Romans whom many glorious deeds are praised and celebrated in their written annals. Indeed, they are the implacable enemies of their ancestors' glory, for thanks to them, the Rome that was conceived and built by the labors of men of old fell further while she still stood than ever she has fallen in her ruin. For in that ruin there fell only stones and wood, whereas by these men's lives were overthrown, not by her walls, but by her moral defenses and adornments. More fatal than the flames which consumed the city's houses were the lusts that burned in their hearts. Having said these things, I brought my first book to an end. I come next, then, to those evils which that city has endured from the beginning, either in herself or in the provinces subject to her, all of which, had the doctrine of the gospel been in those days freely proclaimed against their false and treacherous gods, the Romans would have attributed to the Christian religion. Chapter 3. That history might be consulted in order to show what evils befell the Romans when they still worshipped the gods, small g, before the Christian religion grew up. Remember, however, that in recalling these things, I am still speaking against those ignorant men from whose lack of knowledge has arisen the vulgar saying, "No rain, blame the Christians." Those among our adversaries who are learned in the liberal arts and who love history are very well aware of these facts. They pretend not to know them, however, in order to arouse the greatest hostility in the untutored mob. For they strive to confirm the vulgar in their belief that the calamities which are bound to afflict the human race from time to time, and from place to place, occur because of the name of Christian, which is now ranged everywhere, and with great fame and brilliance against their gods. Let them recall with us, therefore, the many and diverse calamities by which the Roman commonwealth was consumed before Christ had come in the flesh, and before his name was revealed to the nations with that glory which they envy in vain. And let them defend, if they can, in the face of these things, those gods who are worshipped precisely so that their worshippers shall not suffer such evils. If they have suffered such things in our own time, they contend that these are to be imputed to us. But why, then, did those gods of whom I am about to speak permit such things to befall their worshippers long before the preaching of Christ's name and the prohibition of their sacrifices had offended them? Chapter 4. The worshippers of the gods never received from the gods any wholesome precept, and in their rites celebrated all manner of disgracefulness. First, why did the gods of Rome fail to ensure that their votaries were set free from their worst practices? The true God justly neglected those by whom he had not worshipped. No, by whom he was not worshipped. But why did those gods whose worship these most ungrateful men complain is forbidden them not give their worshippers laws to help them to live well. Surely it was only fitting that such care on the part of men for the worship of the gods should have been matched by care on the part of the gods for the conduct of men. But, you reply, it is of his own free will that someone is wicked. Who denies it? Nonetheless, it behooves the gods, who were their protectors, not to hide from the people who worship them the precepts of a good life, but to instruct them by means of plain commandments. By means of prophets also, they should have called sinners together and censured them, plainly warning evildoers of punishment and promising rewards to those who live righteously. But what of this kind was ever heard to resound in ready and clear speech in the temples of those gods? I myself, when a young man, used sometimes to come to their sacrilegious spectacles and games, and watch the ascetic priest, and listen to the musicians, and enjoy the most disgraceful exhibitions which were enacted in the honor of the gods and goddesses, of the Virgin Celestius, and of Burisanitha, the mother of them all, before the litter of Burisanitha on the solemn day of her purification, songs were sung by the most lewd players, which were not fit for the mother of any senator, or of any honest man, or indeed the mothers even of the players themselves to hear, let alone the mother of the gods. There is, after all, something in the reverence which human beings feel for their parents that not even indecency itself can eradicate. Accordingly, the players themselves would no doubt have been ashamed to rehearse such wickedness at home before their own mothers as the obscene speeches and actions which they performed in public. Yet they performed them before the mother of the gods, and with a teeming multitude of both sexes watching and listening. A multitude which, even though drawn in from every side of curiosity, should at least have gone forth blushing with outraged modesty. If these are sacred rites, what are profane ones? If this is purification, what is defilement? And these rites involve furcula, as though some feast were being celebrated at which the impure demons were to be delighted by a banquet given in their honor. But who does not see what manner of spirits they are who take delight in such filthy things? Who, say one, who does not know that there are any foul spirits at all whose intention is to deceive us with the names of gods? That's a small g small gs, or one whose life is lived in such a fashion that he hopes to perpetuate them, and fears their anger more than that of the true God, capital G. Chapter 5, of the obscenities by which the mother of the gods was honored by her worshippers. In this matter, down here it says, furculum, what I tried to say up there, is a litter or bier used to carry the image of a god in a procession. But furcula are also the trays on which food is served, be the courses of a banquet. So that's what that meant. So that was a feast. In this matter, I should certainly not wish to have the opinion of those who take pleasure in these most disgusting practices rather than seeking to end them. I should prefer the judgment of that Scipio Nicaea, who was chosen as the best of men by the Senate, and who received into his hands the image of that same demon and bore it into the city. Let him tell us whether he would wish to see his own mother so highly esteemed by the commonwealth as to have such divine honors awarded her, as the Greeks and the Romans and other nations have indeed voted to certain mortals whose services they greatly valued, and whom they believed to have been made immortal and admitted to the assembly of the gods. Beyond doubt he would choose such blessedness for his own mother if it were possible. If, however, We then ask whether he would wish to see the celebration of such vile acts among her divine honors. Would he not cry out that he would rather see his mother lying dead and bereaved of sins than that she should live as a goddess and hear such things with pleasure? God forbid that a senator of the Roman people, furnished with such a mind that he forbade the building of a theater in a city of strong men, should wish to see his mother worshipped as a goddess and propitiated with rites whose very words would disgust a virtuous woman. Nor would he by any means believe that the modesty of so praiseworthy a woman could be so undermined by defecation that her worshippers would seek to honor her with language such that if, while alive among men, she had heard it hurled at someone as an insult without stopping her ears and withdrawing herself, her family and husband and children would have blushed for her. This mother of the gods, then, was of such a character that even the worst of men would have been ashamed to have her as his mother. Yet, in order to take possession of the minds of the Romans, she sought out the best of men, not to admonish and help him, but to cheat and deceive, like her of whom it is written that a woman will hunt for the precious souls of men. She did this so that this great souled man should be so lifted up by her seemingly divine testimony as to esteem himself truly the best of men, and hence not seek the true godliness and religion, without which every character, however praiseworthy, falters and falls through pride. But how else, then, by cunning, could that goddess have brought out the best of men, when in her rites she seeks such things as the best of men would shrink from at their feasts? Chapter 6. That the gods of the pagans never laid down any doctrine of right living. Those divinities, then, took no care of the lives and morals of the cities and people by whom they were worshipped, because they issued no dire prohibition of their own, and permitted them to become the worst of men. They allowed them to fall prey to those horrible and detestable evils which afflict not fields and vineyards, not home and property, and not indeed only the body, which is subject to the mind, but the mind itself, the very mind that rules the body. Or if there was any such prohibition, let it be shown, let it be proved. Nor let them tell us of I know not what secret doctrines whispered into the ears of these initiated into the mysteries of religion, who were thereby taught probity and chastity of life. And there's a 6. It's on mystery religions in general. C.K. Prum, Mystery Religions, Greco-Oriental, New Catholic Encyclopedia, New York, 1967. Ovid. So these are the footnotes by the editor here of R.W. Dyson. Okay. Rather, let them show us or remind us of the places that were at any time consecrated, not to games and the obscene songs and gestures of actors, not to the celebration of the flight of the kings, with outpourings of every abandoned wickedness, a celebration of flight indeed, the flight of modesty and honor, but to assemblies where the people receive the instruction of the gods. Let them show us where the wretched people receive the instructions of the gods concerning the restraint of avarice, the subduing of ambition, the curbing of luxury, and where they might learn what Perseus teaches when he rebukes us, saying, Learn, O wretched ones, and know the causes of things. Learn what we are and to what end we are born, what is given to us, how and where to round off our goal pleasantly, what limit to set to wealth, how to choose well, that is, the value of money, and how much of it should be spent on fatherland and loved ones, what God has commanded you to be, and what is your place in the business of mankind. Let them tell us in what ways those precepts of the gods, small g, with an S, who taught them were wont to be recited and frequently heard by the peoples who worship them, as we can show churches established for this purpose wherever the Christian religion has gone forth. Chapter 7. That the fightings of the philosophers are useless because they are without divine authority, for man, naturally inclined to sin, is more influenced by the doings of the gods than by the arguments of men. Will our adversaries perhaps remind us of the schools of the philosophers and their disputations? In the first place, these are not Roman, but Greek, or even if they are now Roman, because Greece herself has been made into a Roman province, they are still not the precepts of gods, but the invention of men. They are the inventions of men who, to the best of their endeavors and endowed with the finest intellects, sought to investigate by reason what lies hidden in the order of nature, what should be desired and shunned in the sphere of morals, and what in the field of logic is entailed by strict deduction, and what does and does not follow from given premises. And some of them, insofar as they were aided by God, did indeed make certain great discoveries. When impeded by their own humanity, however, they erred, especially when the divine providence justly resisted their pride, so that it might show, by comparison with them, that it is through humility that the path of godliness ascends on high. There will, however, by the will of God, the true Lord, be an opportunity for us to investigate and discuss this later. But the philosophers at least tried to discover the means by which a good life is to be lived and blamelessly attained. Surely, then, it would have been more just to vote divine honors to them rather than to the gods. How much better and more honorable it would have been to have a temple of Plato in which his books were read rather than the temples in which the Galli were mutilated, the effeminate consecrated, and a bad man, not a bad man, but a mad man, slashed themselves. Temples in which all the cruel and wicked things customarily found in the rites of the gods, the wickedly cruel or cruelly wicked things, were celebrated. How much more satisfactory a way it would have been of training the young in justice if there had been public recitations of righteous laws given by the gods, rather than empty praise of the laws and institutes of the men of old. For even now, possessed as they are by what Persius calls the burning poison of lust, the worshippers of such gods would rather contemplate what Jupiter did than what Plato taught or Cato believed. Hence, a disgraceful young man in Terence gazes at a certain picture painted on a wall, in which was shown how Jupiter sent, as they tell, a golden shower to fall into the lap of Danae. He finds in so great an authority a patron for his own wickedness, and so he boasts that in what he does he is imitating a god, small g. What a god, small g, he says, he who from highest heaven shakes the temples with his thunder. Should I, a mere man, not do the same? Indeed, I did it with pleasure. Chapter 8 of the theatrical performances by the gods, small g, are not offended but placated by the betrayal in them of their shameful acts. These, however, are only tales of the poets. They do not derive from the rites of the gods. I should not, in fact, like to say whether those mysteries are more shameful than the theatrical performances. I do, however, say this: the history confutes those who deny it, that it was not merely by their own ignorant submission that the Romans introduced into the rites of their gods those displays in which the fictions of the poets hold sway. Rather, the gods themselves, by imperious commands, and in a certain sense by extortion, caused these things to be solemnly performed for them and consecrated in their honor. I touched briefly on this point in the first book. It was when pestilence was growing ever more severe that theatrical performances were first instituted at Rome by the authority of the pontiff. What man is there, then, who will not consider that, in living his own life, he ought rather to follow the example set in plays performed by divine institution than the prescriptions of laws promulgated by merely human counsel? After all, the poet who portrayed Jupiter as an adulterer did so falsely, then surely the chaste gods would have vented their anger and vengeance upon human beings for presenting such vile plays, not for neglecting to do so. Wow. Of these theatrical performances, the most tolerable are the comedies and tragedies, that is, the dramas which poets compose for the stage. but which, unlike so many others, do at least not make use of obscene language, even though they contain many shameful things. These are even included in what we call an honorable and liberal education, and boys are obliged by their elders to read and study them. Wow. Chapter 9. How the ancient Romans regarded that poetic license to which the Greeks, following the judgment of their gods, chose to allow full expression. Of the ancient Romans regarded this matter of theatrical performance as attested in the book written by Cicero called De Republica, where Scipio, who is one of the disputants, says, the shameful acts portrayed in the comedies could never have won approval in the theaters had not the manners of the times already accepted such things. The Greeks of earlier times, however, at least preserved a certain consistency in their sinful opinions, for their law permitted the comedy to say what it liked of anyone it chose, and to do so by name. Wow. In the same work, therefore, Africanus says, whom did it not mention? Or rather, whom did it not vex? Whom has it spared? Granted that it struck at mischievous rabble-rousers and seditious men in the commonwealth. Cleophon, Hyperbolus, let us tolerate this, he says, although it were better for such citizens to be noted by the censor than by the poets. But for Percellus, who had for so many years presided over the city with the greatest authority in peace and war, to be attacked in their verses, and for these to be enacted on the stage, this was no more proper than if our own Plaudius or Navius had chosen to speak ill of Publius and Gnaeus Scipio, or Scylla of Marcus Cato. Charlie. That dog will not quit. Hold on 1 minute. Charlie, get in here. Charlie. Come on, Charlie. Get in here, Charlie. Get in here. Okay. Sorry. He don't listen. He really don't. Okay. Next, a little further on, he says, although our 12 tables sanctioned the death penalty only for very few crimes, among those deemed worthy of such punishment was anyone who brought infamy or disgrace upon another by singing or composing verses against him. Splendid! For how we lead our lives should be a matter for the judgment of magistrates interpreting the law rather than for the ingenuity of poets, nor ought we to have to listen to insults without being allowed by law to reply and to defend ourselves before a tribunal. I have thought it well to quote these lines from the 4th book of Cicero's De Republica. I have done so word for word, although with some few words omitted or somewhat transposed to make the meaning clear, and the passage is certainly pertinent to the matter which I am endeavoring to explain as well as I can. Scipio next makes some further remarks and then concludes the passage by showing that the ancient Romans did not allow any living person to be either praised or vilified on the stage. The Greeks, however, as I have said, though less fastidious, were nonetheless more consistent in what they permitted, for they saw that their gods accepted and enjoyed such insults when directed in theatrical performance, not only against men, but even against themselves. They saw also that it made no difference whether the scenes commemorated and enacted in the theaters and by their worshippers represented only the fancies of the poets, or really their own wicked deeds. Would that these things were deemed worthy only of laughter and not of imitation. And so they concluded that it would have been far too proud a thing to spare the reputation of the city's rulers and citizens when the deities themselves did not wish even their own reputations to be spared. Chapter 10. With what injurious art the demons chose to allow their crimes, whether false or genuine, to be made known. As for the argument brought forward in defense of such performances, that what is said of the gods is not true, but false and invented. If you judge according to the godliness of our religion, this only makes matters worse. If you reflect upon the malice of the demons, however, what more acute and skillful means of deception could there be? For when some opprobrium is hurled at a good and beneficent governor of the fatherland, is this not worthy in proportion as it is remote from the truth and foreign to the true facts of his life? What punishments will suffice, then, when such wicked and manifest injury is done to a god? But the malignant spirits whom the Romans suppose to be gods are willing to have even iniquities which they have not committed attributed to them, so long as they can ensnare the minds of human beings with these beliefs as with nets, and drag them down along with themselves to a predestined punishment. It may be that such things were indeed committed, but by men who, to the joy of those who rejoice in human error, are held to be gods. For the demons use 1,000 harmful and deceitful arts to put themselves forward as objects of worship. Or again, even though no such crimes were actually committed by any man or men, it may be that those most cunning spirits freely accept such fictions concerning the divine beings, so that a sufficient authority may seem to have been handed down to earth from heaven itself for the perpetration of such vile and disgraceful things. The Greeks, then, when they perceived themselves to be the servants of such divine beings, deemed that the poet should in no way refrain from reviling men on the stage just as often and just as greatly. They thought in this way either because they desired to resemble their gods in this respect, or because they feared that, if they required for themselves a more honorable reputation than they allowed the gods, and so in this sense placed themselves above them, they might provoke them to anger. Hold on. Charlie! Charlie! I'm squirting him all the way to the door, and he's just shaking it off and going. So anyway, I'm going to end this here. I will pick it up later, and we will be in chapter 11. Yes. All right, praise God. Until then, keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Bye-bye. Who's the reason?